Hello, everybody, and welcome in to another episode of Speaking Steagles, the premier Pennsylvania pro football podcast. I'm Nick Bate, joined as always by Ricardo Martinez Paz, and we have a fun episode coming at you today. Starting things off, we're going to an every other week schedule now that the Super Bowl has passed us. We're on to the new league year, and we're going to be doing episodes every other week. And this week is a fun one because it's our big free agency preview episode. So we are going to be talking all things kind of free agency, what we expect of these teams, who are the priorities to re-sign on both the Eagles and Steelers, who are some potential players or position groups to target in the free agency period, and do we expect any maybe cap casualties or extensions to come about this offseason? So it's a big prediction episode. We're looking ahead at free agency, and today was the franchise tag deadline. So free agency is really upon us, and things are going to start getting crazy here in the next couple days and weeks. So that being said, Ricardo, free agency is upon us, man. How you feeling? You excited?
I don't know. I feel like both our teams have quite a few free agents. So and both teams are going to lose a lot of players. I don't know if I'm excited necessarily, but it's certainly going to be interesting to see who the Eagles and Steelers bring back. Um, Man, we're gonna get right into that real soon. But man, it's really interesting.
It definitely feels like the type of year where there's not going to be like the Steelers did a lot of spending in free agency last year, and that was just the nature of how their cap situation unfolded. I don't really see that being the same situation this year,
Yeah,
and I think it's going to be more kind of minor moves that are they're going to really bolster the roster. But there's still some names that I could see them going after that I think are names that aren't going to warrant a lot of money, but can definitely have a big impact. So I'm excited to kind of get into it and discuss kind of some of these players. So I
yeah.
think that's where we're going to start, and we will start kind of breaking down. I think that the Eagles have more free agents than the Steelers, if I remember correctly. Um, I mean, the Eagles have a ton of free agents this year, and it's a lot of guys at high profile
Do you
positions,
do you
high
want me to
profile
list
names.
them because I have the whole list right here?
Yeah, if you want to list them, because I have the Steelers one right in front of me.
All right, so I'll start with the offense of the Eagles. Tackle, we'll just go lineman. Andre Dillard, first round pick, bust, turned into a backup. Isaac Seumalo, who started this year. Gardner Minshew, the backup. Miles Sanders, Boston Scott, both running backs. Interesting. We'll get into that. Tight end Tyree Jackson, wide receiver Zach Pascal. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I think the Eagles are losing more. Robert Quinn didn't really do much. Brandon Graham, veteran, been with the Eagles his whole life. Defensive tackles, Linval Joseph, Dominican Sue. I mean, they're more just plug-in players for the Super Bowl run. Javon Hargrave, that'll be a big one. Fletcher Cox as well. And then linebacker, TJ Edwards, Kazir White, cornerback, James Bradbury, safeties, Marcus Epps, and CJ Gardner Johnson. And I'm going to throw in long snapper Rick Lovato in there. But yeah, that's 19 total free agents. So a long list of players. Yeah. So
And I mean, while we're doing it, I'll run through the Steelers real quick, and then we can kind of prioritize these guys. Steelers at wide receiver, Miles Boykin is a free agent. On the offensive line, both backup tackles, Trent Scott and Jesse Davis, both hitting the free agent market. Backup tight end, Zach Gentry. Third string quarterback, Mason Rudolph. Third string running back, Benny Snell Jr. Fullback, Derek Watt, brother of TJ Watt, obviously. A lot of guys on the defensive line are free agents this year for the Steelers. Larry Ogunjobi, Chris Wormley, Tyson Alualu, more of an outside linebacker, Malik Reed. Then when it comes to inside linebackers, Robert Spillane and former first-round pick Devin Bush, along with Marcus Allen. And then at the safety position, Terrell Edmonds, DeMonte Casey, Carl Joseph, and then, of course, the big one is cornerback Cam Sutton.
Yeah.
So both these teams have some a lot of free agents up this year, and certainly some big names that are going to be priorities to re-sign. So I guess we'll kind of start. I think I mean, I don't know if you want to do this differently. I think we should just kind of give our top 5 guys that we want to be re-signed, and then we can kind of get to some of the guys that are on the outside of that list, and then maybe anybody that we're like, hey, it's fine if they walk in free agency. Best of luck to you. So,
Yeah.
you know what? We've been talking a lot of Eagles in recent episodes. We're going to start with the Steelers today.
Yeah. Cool with that,
so,
for sure.
So I'll start with number 5 here. And it's going to be I don't think this may come off as a little bit of a surprise to you, but when you hear my logic, I think it might make sense. And I think the Steelers also can survive a lot of their free agency, if they're a lot of their free agents, versus the Eagles, who I feel like have a lot of more high profile free agents. So number 5 for the Steelers is Zach Gentry.
Interesting.
Really down to the fact that he's a really solid tight end too, behind Pat Freiermuth, who is becoming one of the top tight ends in the NFL because he's so great in the run game, blocking. And you know what? He can hold his own in the pass game when called upon. I mean, he's never going to be a number 1 tight end on a team, but as a second option who's really good in the run game, he's a contributor to this Pittsburgh Steelers roster. So I have him at 5. Number 4, kind of a combination, but mainly Terrell Edmonds. A guy who was a former first round pick, really kind of struggled in his time with Pittsburgh, but really has come into his own the last 2 years and really found a role as, kind of not a key guy. He's not going to be the first name you think of when you think of the Steelers defense, but a good role player on the Steelers defense. And it's another guy where if you could keep him, kind of similar to last year, the Steelers kept him on a cheap deal. I think it was less than $3 million they got him at. But if you can keep him for kind of the same number, he's a guy that I think you'd certainly want back. But safety's not wildly important, and obviously you have Minkah Fitzpatrick locked up. Kind of the reason it's a hybrid is because I'd like for the Steelers to try and keep either Terrell Edmonds or Monte Casey, who was obviously last year as well. Number 3, I think also maybe a little bit of a surprise because I feel like people have already kind of got it set in their mind that he's gone this offseason, is Larry Ogunjobi. Now, here's my mindset with it. I have 3 guys who are purely defensive linemen that are free agents this year, and Larry Ogunjobi, Chris Wormley, he obviously had the ACL injury this year, and Tyson Alualu, who's well past his prime. But Larry Ogunjobi has a solid year last year. He didn't light up the stat sheet, and I still don't think he's kind of repaired his value to the point where he's going to get the contract that he originally got last offseason with the Chicago Bears before failing the physical, which allowed him to sign for the Steelers on a cheaper deal. So I feel like if Larry Ogunjobi kind of wants to continue to build back up his value, build back up what he could potentially earn in free agency in future years, I could see him maybe considering taking another short-term deal with the Steelers for maybe 1 year and continue to kind of build back up in his value in a defensive system that he's now 1 year more familiar with. And for the Steelers, I mean, this defensive line, yes, they've got Hayward, they've got DeMarvin Leal, but it's for what the Steelers want to do and what teams in the NFC North want to do. It's a priority to build that defensive line. Bringing back a guy like Larry Ogunjobi, I don't think would hurt if you can get him at the right number. Number 2, 2 and 1. These are the guys that are really the high priority guys for me to resign. Number 2 is Robert Spillane. 79 total tackles in 2022. This guy has continued to get better and better year after year. And he's not a top inside linebacker by any stretch of the imagination, but right now the Steelers defense, and I'm going to get into Myles Jack a little bit later, but excluding him, currently the only other linebackers that they have on the interior on the roster under contract is Mark Robinson, who was a 7th round pick last year, and Tay Crowder, who's been a little bit of a journeyman. So the idea of bringing back Spillane is really intriguing to me. Because I think he's a really solid player. He took snaps away from Devin Bush last year, who's also a free agent. He's familiar with the defense, and even if you do find someone else that could get snaps over Myles Jack over Robert Spillane, if you were to retain him, that's a really solid guy to have for depth purposes. So he's my number 2, and number 1, it should go without saying, is Cam Sutton. Omar Khan, all but said at the combine that he's their top priority to re-sign in free agency, and it's their goal to do so. So I believe he's going to be back. I think he's slept on as one of the top cornerbacks in the NFL. He can play both inside and outside, and if you sign him long term, maybe towards the end of his contract, he's just a nickel corner, but still I think there's value in bringing him back. And just to show how good he was last year, completion percentage against. His completion percentage against last season was 47.9%. Compare that to Sauce Gardner, rookie of the year, a guy that people are already considering one of the top corners in the league, 53.5%. Jalen Ramsey, a guy that people consider one of the top corners in the league, 62.6%. So Cam Sutton, to me, the Steelers absolutely, that needs to be the one guy that they absolutely bring back. I'm curious what you think of my list, and then we can kind of get into some of the omissions.
So, I mean, Cam Sutton had 3 interceptions, arguably the best corner on the roster last year.
Well, it's not an argument. It's not an argument. He was the best corner on the
roster. Straight up, yeah.
I'm just plugging in my laptop over here. I just realized.
Okay, so I had your first 2 right, Sutton and Spillane in that same order. I don't know. I threw in Mason Rudolph potentially just because as a backup, and we were talking about this in the last episode that he's one injury away, one Kenny Pickett injury away from stepping in. I mean, it would be ideal, maybe for like the Steelers to bring him back. And Rudolph knows that, he's not really going to be competing for a starting job at the moment. And I feel like that I had him at number 3, which might have been a little too high. But yeah, and especially because, Trubisky might get caught. Who knows? We haven't seen that yet. But keeping Rudolph over Trubisky probably makes the most sense, especially with the cap situation the Steelers are dealing with. But Terrell Edmonds, I also got at number 4.
Nice. Yeah.
The only one, the Gentry one, was a little surprising. Yeah.
Okay.
That one I'll say was the Ogunjobi one. I probably should have put him in there. That makes sense though, because he did have a solid year, even if he didn't necessarily light up the stat sheet as you said.
And with Ogunjobi, I think it all just depends on what his market kind of pushes his value to.
Yeah.
Because if the market is there for interior defensive linemen, and people value what he did last year and think, hey, 2 years removed now from that injury, can he continue to get better? He's going to price himself out of the Steelers' range. But if things are kind of falling that way and the Steelers can get him for another 1 year cheap deal and he wants to continue to repair his stock, then it could be a fit.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I don't remember if you said Benny Snell on the list. Is he a free agent? Yeah, right.
He is a free agent. I had him off just because I feel like the tandem, even though Benny Snell does have a lot of value in special teams, I think the tandem of Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris is really solid. You can find a depth piece at the running back position to fill in. And I also just think the logic for Benny Snell, too, a little bit might be, hey, you're a free agent. See if you can cash in and go to a spot where you could at the least be a backup, be one opportunity away from really getting some solid reps.
Right. Okay, that's fair. Yeah, I put him at number 5, but Gentry over Snell definitely makes sense. But you want to talk about who else like you left out on this list?
Yeah, I mean, some of the guys I left off, I think it's funny that we both, without a doubt, left this guy off because I would just be absolutely shocked if he wound up, I mean, he would literally have to take like a 1 year contract for like $2 million and for him to come back. And I don't even think the Steelers want him back at this point. It's like, cut your mistakes at this point. But Devin Bush, I mean, he's gone. Yeah. It's tough. When he was drafted, I mean, I have his jersey. He was one of my favorite players his rookie year. But I mean, what really hurt him is the fact that ACL injury, I think, really affected him. And he's just not the same player in coverage that he was prior to the injury. And he just doesn't rack up tackles at the rate that you would have hoped for a guy that you traded up to 10th overall in the draft to get. So I think he's gone. And he kind of even said last offseason, like his days in Pittsburgh were numbered. So I see him as going on his way out. Derek Watt's another interesting one. Like if he wants to come back just to play with his to play with his brother in Pittsburgh, I'd be happy to have him back at the fullback position, but I'm not paying anything, more than, don't even talk about going over $1 million. I mean, I'm really looking for a fullback to be either a guy that's on, a cheap rookie deal or someone who's taking the veteran minimum. I mean, just the way that the Steelers kind of deploy their run game, Derek Watts really doesn't have a function to be making money. So unless he wants to come on something closer to the veteran minimum, he's probably gone. Chris Wormley and Tyson Alualu. I mean, Alualu kind of on the twilight of his career. Didn't really contribute much at all last season. Chris Wormley has the torn ACL. I mean, it's really unfortunate, but he's probably not coming back either. Yeah. And then at that point, it's a couple of backup tackles, which, we didn't really get to see Jesse Davis last year because he was the primary backup tackle because the tackles just didn't get hurt. So, I mean, he's potentially replaceable. And then it really just comes down to the wide receivers that they have available. I didn't mention Steven Sims. I think he's got an exclusive rights free agency. He is a free agent, but he's not a unrestricted free agent. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if the Steelers can bring him back, fine. But again, he's not a guy that's replaceable. And Miles Boykin, hey, I would love to have him back because he's great on special teams, but he was making over $1 million last year, which just the Steelers at this situation with their cap can't afford to do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where things unfold for me. And then the two guys that you said, yeah, Benny Snell, I'm kind of good with. Mason Rudolph is the interesting one. I'm gonna get to Mitch Trubisky a little bit later in the show, but it makes a lot of sense for him to potentially get cut this offseason because he frees up, I believe, $8 million in cap space.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's worth it to allocate that to a backup quarterback, but Omar Khan really made it seem at the combine that both him and Art Rooney really want to have Mitch Trubisky back as a backup. And I mean, he's under contract for the extra year. He seems to be a good presence in the locker room, which I think is kind of the main thing. And the dynamic between him and Kenny Pickett works. So I think that the smart thing to do would be to cut Mitchell Trubisky, free up that cap space, and bring in a veteran to be the backup. Maybe Mason Rudolph. It does make sense at the end of the day, kind of the way that you alluded to it and we talked about last episode. But the indications right now seem to be that Mitchell Trubisky, the organization isn't necessarily jumping head over heels to ship him out of town.
Right. Right.
I don't think it's necessarily the right mindset, but the one thing that Omar Khan, the one thing, I mean, when he was the assistant GM under Kevin Colbert, he was known for being a cap specialist and making things work. So I'm not really worried if he wants to retain Mitchell Trubisky, he'll find a way to make it work and still bring in or re-sign the guys that he wants to bring in or re-sign.
I just think it'd be interesting if they did keep him, but I mean, it's not like Trubisky caused any issues in the locker room, like you said. So I mean, either way, you're probably gonna lose one of the QBs. But that's just, they're backups. They just come and go. That's just how.
I mean, Trubisky's gonna be a backup wherever he goes if the Steelers were to cut him. So for him, I don't think it makes a difference that he's here. For him, he probably prefers it because he already knows the system. It really just comes down to if the Steelers want that extra cap space or if Omar Khan can make it work even with his contract still on the books.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely keep our eye on that because who knows if it does happen. But it's certainly an interesting situation in the backup position.
100%. We'll touch on it a little bit more. But, unless you have any other questions or things about my list, we can move over to the Eagles now.
No, I think, that's all I have on that.
Again, the Steelers have a lot of free agents, but it's not super top heavy.
Yes,
so to speak.
Yes.
Whereas, as I'm sure we're going to get into with the Eagles, it's kind of the complete opposite.
Very, very top heavy here. Oh man, this list is, I don't know, this might surprise you, but I'll start up with number 5. Cornerback James Bradbury. I mean, okay, say what you want about the Super Bowl, the controversial call and all of that, but the whole entire season, I feel like he was, statistically, he was better than Slay, than Darius Slay was, and really was great opposite of Darius Slay. The only issue there, which it's a big issue really, is he's going to get paid. And I don't think the Eagles are going to pay what he's asking for. It's just, especially with, you got to take into account Jalen Hurts' potential massive extension. We just saw Daniel Jones get $40 million per year, 4 years, $160 million. So, like Jalen Hurts is going to get more than that, at least 45 mil, if not 50. Some insiders saying it could reach 50, but with, when you're going to give your quarterback that kind of money, it's going to be really tough to sign some of those bigger names. But if the Eagles can somehow find a way to make it like a 1-year deal, Howie Roseman specifically, then bringing James Bradbury makes sense, even if he is turning just 30 years old. I mean, he's a veteran, just like Darius Slay, and it would be nice for the Eagles to bring him back. I just don't know if it'll happen. But I'll go to number 4, Brandon Graham. This might be interesting to you too. I know he's 34, 35, I know he's sort of in the back end of his career, but he was still pretty productive. 11 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. And I mean, he was much more of a rotational guy this year, but he was still efficient as hell. Yeah, nearing 35 years old. I mean, he's a captain of the team, veteran again, captain, leader, the king of trash talking. Honestly, one of my favorite guys to watch. But he still like has enough gas in the tank to, be productive. Be even if he is a rotational guy. I just with Brandon Graham, I don't think he. I mean, he's been linked to the Browns. He's been linked to a couple other teams. Um, but Brandon Graham's been an Eagle his entire life, and if Howie, I feel like Howie would give him at least one more year if he doesn't retire this upcoming season, which it doesn't seem like he will be. But Brandon Graham, at least as a rotational guy, would be great to have back, especially with younger guys like Josh Sweat. I mean, Son Reddick's still fairly young. So, I mean, just the presence in the locker room would certainly be missed if he's not re-signed. The third one, I feel like this is where it gets more obvious. These top three, and I'll go with Javon Hargrave. He had 11 sacks, which was fourth among defensive tackles, his best year with the Eagles, and a 78.2 PFF grade. Developed much better into a pass rusher. He was kind of inconsistent against the run, but still he was really good. It just such a big like filling the gap. Really just stepped up this year and just kind of wreaked havoc up the middle of the field. But I feel like a 1 to 2 year deal would be probably his best, but I don't think. I mean, he's only 30. I mean, he's not getting younger, but he's still pretty good. And I personally value him over Cox in terms of production. So I would if I had to pick between the two, I would pick Javon Hargrave. But in any case, number 2, safety CJ Gardner-Johnson. I feel like this name was going to come up at some point. And yeah, he missed 5 games, whatever. But he was still first in the league in interceptions. There were rumors about him getting the franchise tag at least before the last couple days, and obviously didn't get that. Maybe Howie Roseman's working out a long-term deal with them, potentially, but if that's not the case, he would be a huge loss to the Eagles. He's just a playmaker. Also, really good trash talker in the back end. It's the Eagles have to sign re-sign one of their safeties, whether it be Gardner Johnson or Marcus Epps. I prefer Gardner Johnson over Epps. I think he's a better player overall. It'd certainly be missed and he would definitely get paid a lot of money for the season he had, despite missing a few games with injury. And then number 1, TJ Edwards, middle linebacker. I feel like he went under the radar. Yeah, the Super Bowl, it was probably it was the worst game of the season for him. But he still overall finished with 159 tackles. That's 7th. That was 7th in the NFL. 99 solo, also 7th. 84.8 PFF grade. I mean, each and every season, I feel like he's gotten better. Undrafted free agent many years ago. And like I said, every year he's just gotten so much. Like, he's just very smart, a very talented player. He might not be the most athletic, but he's a leader on that team. And listen, I don't know who the Eagles would replace him with. I mean, yeah, we'll talk about it a little later if they don't re-sign him, but I think they should. And according to a few sources, it could be at least $12 million a season that he's looking for. But that would be a huge loss in the middle of the field. Someone who calls the plays on defense. That's someone I feel like you need back on that defense, especially with all the change that's happened. So that's my top 5. I don't know what your thoughts are.
It's very interesting. I'll preface this by saying I do have James Bradbury on my list, but I feel like he's the most likely guy that's gone this offseason.
Yep.
Because he's going to warrant so much money, and because you do have both of your linebackers that you have to pay, both of your safeties that you have to, you got to try to bring one of them back. You've got guys along the D line that you have to bring back. I feel like while the corner position is such an important position to have a guy there, the fact that he is going to be in his 30s here and he's going to warrant so much money. I think, yeah, he's the guy that's most likely gone. I will also preface this by saying, and maybe I did this a little foolishly, but I didn't include Fletcher Cox or Brandon Graham on the list just because I feel like if those guys are to still continue to play, it's just hard for me to envision them going to another team, especially after making it to the Super Bowl with the Eagles. So,
Right.
kind of specifically with Brandon Graham, I would see him. I mean, at his age, I don't see him signing a long-term contract. So I would see it
Yeah.
being more of a short-term deal to come back with the Eagles. And after he's already made so much money throughout his career, it was just kind of like it's not as much of a high of a priority. So he wasn't in my top 5, but I definitely would have considered it. So at number 5, and this may surprise you, I actually had TJ Edwards. So he was there. To me, again, it was just kind of the whole idea of positional value. Because it's
Right.
like, to me, I feel like the inside linebacker in today's NFL maybe isn't as valuable as a corner, as an edge rusher, as a defensive lineman. So that was just
Mhm.
kind of the mindset there. But everything you've talked about with TJ Edwards and the fact that, I mean, he is the signal caller of this team on defense. So to bring him back, especially when there's going to be this much turmoil, I think is super logical. And then I had a guy, and I wanted to ask you about this, a guy
Yeah.
that didn't make your list, but I had him there because I think just everybody in this unit was a big factor to Jalen Hurts being good, and that was Isaac Seumalo. So he didn't make your list. He would have been number
Yeah.
4 on mine. Walk us through why he wasn't one of your top 5 priorities.
Well, first, I feel like he's been injury prone this season, been fortunate. And I mean, I think Jeff Stoutland is just so good at developing offensive linemen. Jeff Stoutland University, that's the whole spiel there. And so I think Somalo is expendable for that reason because Jeff Stoutland is so good at really growing, linemen, whether it be young. I mean, he's just so good at it. It's maybe I'm taking Somalo for granted, but he wasn't exactly the best. I think he might have been the worst graded out of all the offensive linemen. I mean, they still retain the rest of their guys, so one player isn't the end of the world. You got priorities elsewhere, especially on the defense. So that's why I left him out.
Yeah, I mean, you could also consider, moving, maybe it's time for Jack Driscoll to step up. I mean, he's kind of played tackle and guard. Maybe you consider moving Cam Jurgens over
Yeah,
there
I
for a
was about
year
to
or
say
two,
that too.
which
Yeah,
you could also do. So I get that logic. I get that logic for sure. Number 3 was where I had James Bradbury. Again, kind of the positional values why I put him there, even though I don't think he's going to be coming back. And then number 2 was where I had Javon Hargrave. So again, a guy that's going to, I do think he's going to cost a lot of money to
yeah,
retain. I was looking on Spotrac, and I think they have him. I think they projected him at a. Let me see if I can pull it up here. They projected it was a big number. Yeah, they had him signing a 3-year deal for $20 million annually was the projection for him. So a little bit steep for a
mm,
guy, but I mean, like you said, the projection's there. He's not super old yet. And then number 1, I had C.J. Gardner Johnson. I just think everything that you outlined, then you throw on top of it the fact that this guy is versatile. Like if you need him to come and play down in the box, he can do it. If you need him to play in the slot, he can do it. If you need him to just be a safety, play a pure safety position, he can do it. So, it's
yeah,
not like the Steelers with Terrell Edmonds, where you're paying a guy who's really just a downhill, strong safety. You're paying a guy that's super versatile, and like you said, he's a ball hawk too to a certain extent, and he brings an attitude to this Eagles defense. So, um,
yeah,
that I definitely agree. He's a guy that I definitely think the Eagles need to make sure comes back.
yeah. Yeah, I understand your logic on all of those too. I I kind of want to get into the players I left out.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Because there are quite a few, I feel like, notable ones. At least Miles Sanders probably the one that stands out most, and Marcus Epps. Miles Sanders, man, even if he didn't have the career year that he had, I still think the Eagles were gonna move on. Um, it's just running back. I feel like is a position you can replace in the draft. Sure, the Eagles might only have 6 draft picks. Um, but it's still like the offensive line is a huge reason why Miles Sanders. I'm not discrediting him at all.
Yeah.
Just especially in today's NFL when you need like a dual threat running back, I feel like Miles Sanders is purely is more of a runner as opposed to a pass catcher. I mean, each and every year his receptions has gone down, and you really like this season at least. You really saw Kenneth Gainwell, Boston Scott taking those reps as pass catching backs. Like I said, in today's NFL, you kind of need to do both from a running back, and someone's going to pay him. But I really don't think the Eagles are going to prioritize him. I would be shocked if Howie Roseman brought him back. I love Miles Sanders, but I just don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, dude. I mean, there's just not enough money to go around. I mean, there are a lot of good running backs on the free agent market this year. I shouldn't say good, but solid. I
Yeah,
mean, so you never know what the market could do if because there's, a lot of running backs that are free agents, maybe you can get him back super cheap. But again, I'm completely with you. It's the nature of the position. It's easy to find replacements at the running back position. There's only so many guys that are truly game changers in this league. I mean, I'll be honest. I don't even know if Najee Harris is fully a game changer in this league. I'm talking
right.
more guys along the lines of Christian McCaffrey that are that complete dual threat, as you said. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah, he's replaceable, and we see guys get drafted out of the third. Heck, Alvin Kamara was a third-round draft pick. Kareem Hunt was a third-round draft. You could find guys in the mid rounds.
Yeah, I mean the Eagles are linked to be, or at least people are mocking the Eagles to draft Bijan Robinson at number
Out of
10,
Texas,
which
yeah.
I highly doubt is going to happen because that's not where Howie Roseman really goes in the drafts. But Marcus Epps, the other safety, I mean, he was fine. He was solid. Although other teams apparently are raving about him, they want him on the rosters and stuff. And
Mhm.
I mean, he didn't have any interceptions. Yeah, he had his good moments. He would come down in the box too and make really good. I mean, he was a pretty good tackler. I'll say that. I just, again, if I had to prioritize one or the other, I would take CJ Gardner Johnson over Epps. So that's just where I mean, you're not going to pay both safety. That's just
No,
unrealistic.
you can't do that.
Yeah, it's one or the other. And plus, you have Reed Blankenship in the wings. So, and he showed a lot of promise as an undrafted rookie. So, I
100%. I'm
think
with you
he'll
there.
be fine. Yeah. It's Gardner Johnson's the priority in this. So, I don't know if you have any other players you want to ask about.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing else that really surprises me. I think a lot of these guys, it's just kind of like, hey, it's the nature of the business.
Yeah.
You got to move on from them. Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything else that really surprises me. I mean, I guess the one last guy I'll ask you about, Fletcher Cox. I mean, would it
Yeah.
pain you to see him in a different uniform?
Yeah, it would. I just, man, that's the one I was kind of torn about. I was like, should I put him over James Bradbury? Because I feel like it's more realistic that Eagles bring him back. And if they don't re-sign Javon Hargrave, they're going to bring back Fletcher Cox. Even
No
if,
doubt.
I mean, he was still solid. He still does his job. Maybe not as well as he used to. He used to be one of the best, but sort of aging, slowing down a little bit. I mean, he's more rotational, but at the same time, you have Milton Williams, who's gonna get a lot more reps next year. I mean, he had his really good moments this year, and you still have Jordan Davis. I mean, he didn't have quite the season that I expected. I mean, obviously the injury didn't help, but he's gonna get more reps too. He's gonna get more playing time next season.
Yeah, I mean, those guys are going to get a ton of reps, and I think it is a very likely situation that it is Fletcher Cox that comes back instead of um,
Hargrave,
Javon
Javon Hargrave.
Hargrave.
Yeah,
If there's a team that just blows him out of the water contract wise, and the Eagles decide to spend their money on free
that's
agents elsewhere, so
yeah. That's
yeah.
sort of where I stand with that. But yeah,
All right, so let's move on now to positions to target, or if we want to drop a couple names as well. And I'll start again, and I'll go quick with the offense for the Steelers because I do think I want to say a lot of this is like I think a lot of the Steelers plan this offseason. I think Khan even said it recently, like they're going to be building through the draft, like that's going to be
yeah,
there's nothing groundbreaking here with what the Steelers are trying to do, but the offensive line. I think that this is certainly a group that they're going to look to address in um, the draft for sure. And I think it's, because I don't see any of the big three tackles, Paris Campbell, Peter Skoronski, or Broderick Jones falling to them. So I
Yeah.
think that it's a position they're going to address kind of in the mid rounds.
Hmm.
But I think that offensive line is going to be kind of, it's hard to, it's going to cost a lot of money to get one of the top tackles or one of the top offensive linemen in this
Oh
free
yeah.
agent class, and the Steelers they just can't afford to do that. So the one kind of a couple guys that interest me, or one guy that really jumps off the page to me. I don't know how much money he's going to get, but Andre Dillard would kind of be a fit in Pittsburgh because he's a guy that could come in. He's played both tackle positions before. He could compete with Dan Moore Jr. for the starting left tackle position, and potentially kind of not resurrect his career, but elevate himself to a starter. So
Hmm.
outside of him, George Fant, I think is an interesting name, former Jet. Trey
Yeah.
Pipkins, former Charger, guys who could come in and be backup tackles, swing tackles for the Steelers. The other one that's kind of been linked is Taylor Lewan, who
Mm.
is no longer with the Tennessee Titans, just because he's come out and said that he wants to be a Pittsburgh Steeler, which you don't really hear free agents do a lot. He's
Yeah.
also got beef with TJ Watt though, so I don't know if it's really likely at all. But yeah, that's kind of what I see for offensive line. Other than that, I think it's just building through the draft.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, offensive line definitely is. It should be a priority. I mean, it wasn't like it was better than we both expected last
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, and that's
Um,
exactly it. Because they were better than they were last year. It's not worst case scenario if you go in to next season with this same starting five, you bring in a veteran swing tackle, and you take a chance on a kid in the second through fourth round to potentially compete for some playing time. So
yeah,
if that's the formula they go with, I'm not really opposed to
yeah,
it.
yeah, for sure.
Wide receiver is the other position I want to kind of talk about on offense, because I think that the Steelers, everybody knows the Steelers are great at adding wide receivers in the mid to late rounds in the NFL draft. And I'm sure that they're going to pick up a guy in a mid to late round in this year's draft just because they're lacking a little bit of depth there. But again, if I want to talk about some guys that could potentially be on my radar in free agency, specifically guys in the slot, a couple guys that I like are Paris Campbell, Jamison Crowder, and Olamide Zacchaeus, I believe, is the former Falcon. I'm
Yeah,
pronouncing all guys that have played plenty of snaps in the slot. Jamison Crowder is the interesting one because I think you could bring him in really cheap because he had such a poor season last year with the Buffalo Bills. He provides a little bit of a veteran presence because the Steelers just don't have a lot of veterans at the wide receiver position. So
hmm,
I wouldn't be opposed to that. Another guy that I think is interesting is Zach Pascal, another former Eagle,
yeah, yeah,
because of the fact that he can play slot, he can play in the slot, or he can be a depth piece. And if you can either, find another wide receiver in the draft who could kind of be the third wide receiver, or maybe Calvin Austin, who missed all of last year, can be that slot guy, then Zach Pascal can be in a very similar role that he was with the Eagles, as kind of that fourth wide receiver that can play multiple spots at the wide receiver position. So I wouldn't be opposed to him coming in as well. So those were just kind of some names that I had.
yeah. Two Eagles, of course. It's funny because I also sort of had them in mind for the Steelers potentially, but who knows? I mean, maybe one of them. Zach Pascal. I feel like over the last maybe few days or so, I feel like he's been linked to Pittsburgh.
I
So
mean, hey, when you're one of the best teams, when you go to the Super Bowl and you have free agents, teams are going to want the guys that you have that are up for new contracts. So
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
That's just how it goes. So moving to the defense now. I'll start with inside linebacker, and again, I'll talk more about Miles Jack later, but um, they're going to need some pieces at the inside linebacker position. I really like the idea of bringing back Robert Spillane. I like Mark Robinson, the 7th-round rookie, but two guys that I think could really be interesting at the inside linebacker position if they can target him. One is Drew Tranquil, because he's versatile, the former Charger.
Mhm.
The Chargers let Kazir White go, and the Eagles signed him last offseason. If they do something similar with Drew Tranquil, right now Spotrac has him projected as making $4 million a season. I think that could potentially be in the Steelers' wheelhouse to be in on him. And he's a 3-down linebacker. He can do everything you need. And then another guy like is Denzel Perryman, because he's got kind of that sideline to sideline speed. He can run with tight ends and slot wide receivers. He's not purely a get downhill type of linebacker, and I think that'd be a nice kind of change of pace to what the Steelers already potentially have with re-signing Robert Spillane, and obviously what they had last year in Devin Bush, who really kind of lost his step when it came to keeping with guys in coverage. So those were
Yeah.
two guys I kind of saw an inside linebacker that could potentially be a fit.
I mean, it's just a shame with Devin Bush that obviously like we lived together sophomore year and I still remember that Bush jersey you have. It's just
I was
looks so
such a big
promising.
Devin Bush fan, man.
He
See him
was
not
so
pan out like
promising,
this,
and
dude.
then the injury happened, and it wasn't the same. But that's, I guess, how it goes sometimes. But
Yeah, and
um,
it hurts all the more because of the fact that he was, he was a 10th overall pick that the Steelers traded up to get. So,
yeah, I
um,
mean, he did show potential, but it just couldn't ever really get back to that form after the injury. But
yeah.
yeah, in any
So
case,
I'll kind of talk about defensive line and outside linebacker together. On the
Mhm.
D line, I mean, the Steelers are gonna have to do something, and I really think that I'd be shocked if they didn't use one of their first 3 picks on a defensive lineman. I don't know if 17 is necessarily the sweet spot. There's a couple guys that I like there who could potentially be available in the draft, but I think more at 32 or their other second round pick would be more likely. So I really think D line they're gonna have to build it there. Because right now, all they really have is Cam Hayward, and DeMarvin Leal, and Montravius Adams, who's pure defensive tackle. Um,
Mhm.
but outside of that, Chase Winovich is a guy that has been linked to the Steelers at multiple times. The Steelers liked him in a draft. They liked him when he left New England. He won't cost a lot, and he could also potentially be that third outside linebacker. He can line up inside and outside. So I like the idea of Chase Winovich, and then at that point, I think it's just like I said, they gotta get a guy early in the draft this year on the defensive line, and even outside of that, I don't think it'd hurt to bring in somebody who's an experienced veteran for some depth that can play inside or outside on the defensive line. And two guys that I kind of had kind of highlighted was F.A. Odaba of Washington and DeMarcus Walker of Tennessee as two guys that have experience. I don't think they break the bank and could come in and kind of be rotational players and compete for some snaps. And that's also, of course, if you can't bring back Larry Ogunjobi. If you bring back Larry Ogunjobi, then I think you focus on drafting a guy early on, and then you kind of have it set at what your kind of building blocks are at the defensive line. So,
Mhm.
real quick, the one other thing I got to say about outside linebacker, I shared this to my story when he got cut. Man, would I love to see it happen. If the Steelers could bring back Bud Dupree to be the
Yeah.
third outside linebacker and rotate in with TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith, boy, would I have a fun time watching that unit play next year. Holy cow. I mean, you obviously know from freshman and sophomore year. I mean, I was a big Bud Dupree fan when he was with the Steelers. And
Yeah.
it was heartbreaking when he tore his ACL. It was heartbreaking when he left to go to the Titans. But man, I would love him back if the Steelers could get him cheap because he hasn't had the same production with Tennessee. The grass isn't always greener on the other side. It certainly wasn't for him in Tennessee. Come back to Pittsburgh, bud. We want you back here. I would love for that to happen.
You come back home, man. Yeah.
Man,
Yeah.
that would make me a happy man. I'll tell you that right now.
Oh, I'm sure, man. Yeah. He got paid a lot of money, but
He did. He
like you
got his
said,
bag. Now come back and hey, even if it's just a 1-year deal, come back and have a good season, and who knows, maybe you get another multi-year contract to kind of close out your career. So
yeah, exactly.
maybe it's something that could unfold for him. Who knows? Or maybe resurrect his career, and who
Maybe.
knows? Maybe he plays into his 30s. But that's just what I'm brainstorming. I'd love to have him back.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
the last position I'll kind of talk about is the secondary. Again, I'd kind of like for it to be at the safety position, either Terrell Edmonds, DeMonte Casey, or a guy along the same skill set. I mean, whoever you want it to be. A guy that I think if you wanted to kind of take a shot on would be Jonathan Abram, because I think he could play
Mhm.
well alongside Minka Fitzpatrick, because Abram is more of that downhill, hit you hard type of safety. And given the fact that the Steelers kind of have a lack of depth at the inside linebacker position, he could kind of go down and play in that fold as well. So just a name that I threw out there. And then when it comes to corner, also a position that I think the Steelers really, I think 17 is the spot they draft a corner this year, unless, all, and I don't want to get into the draft so much, but I do think corner is another priority. They're 3, 4 picks. They're going to pick up
Yeah.
a cornerback. But really, re-signing Cam Sutton's the priority. I think they're going to do that. So outside of that, I like what they have with Cam Sutton, Levi Wallace, potentially bringing in another young guy in the draft. I would like that corner room if that was kind of how they went about it in free agency. And obviously, if you can't get Cam Sutton, you're going to have to replace him with somebody that's a quality corner in free agency. And it is a pretty good corner class. I'm not going to lie this year. There's some good names out there. So
Yeah.
certainly some options, but I'm not going to dive into it because I do think Cam Sutton is going to be a Steeler next year, and they're going to build up the rest of their corner room through the draft.
Yeah, maybe the Eagles swipe him up or something, take him because that's a huge.
That would hurt. But actually, when you say that, it makes complete sense for the Eagles. I mean, that would actually be a home because when him playing as the second corner next to Darius Slay, you know what? I'm going to let you do your list now.
I was gonna say, I mean, it's definitely the secondary as a whole is a huge need, especially at the safety position, as we were just talking about. And I actually didn't even think about him on the list, but if the Steelers don't re-sign him, why not? Why not come to Philadelphia? But another name that'd be interesting is Troy Hill. Experienced corner. And definitely, I mean, the Eagles still have Avonte Maddox. Maybe they could swap and put Avonte Maddox more on the outside as opposed to the slot. But still, it would be an interesting name if the Eagles are targeting him. I don't know if they are, but it would be interesting because, like I said, James Bradbury is not getting re-signed by the Eagles. He's going to command way too much money. But corner is definitely one of those important positions to fill in opposite of Darius Slay. And I think I'm really sticking on the defense here, and I kind of have to. It's just the number of losses, the number of free agents on that side of the ball is just ridiculous. Like I said, 12 players are gone.
Yeah.
And I'll say safety. There was an interesting one, a potential trade for Ravens safety Chuck Clark, who's only accounting for $3.6 million against the cap, and Howie Roseman likes to. I believe he's going into the last year of his deal. Howie Roseman likes to get players on the cheap deals, and he started all 17 games for the Ravens, 101 tackles, and I mean Kyle Hamilton's there now, and I feel like he might be expendable. And if you don't resign either of the two players we were talking about, then potentially getting Chuck Clark would be. I mean, he's still. I mean, he's a veteran player too, so I think potentially.
I actually like that a lot. And I mean, when you think of it from the Ravens' perspective, they already have Marcus Williams under contract, so they're not going to be looking to extend Chuck Clark per se. And like you said, they have Kyle Hamilton there as well, so it is definitely a guy that they could trade and get some value for. So I'm not opposed to that at all, and I think that makes a lot of sense for the Eagles to save some money versus to go out and try and sign someone and then have to maybe spend more money than that. So I actually like that as well.
Yeah, I think I read that from Bleacher Report. I was like, that's such an interesting trade. If that were to happen, I would definitely be okay with that. At least covers one side of the ball. Linebacker, if TJ Edwards is not re-signed, I mean Bobby Wagner would just cut by the Rams soon. I mean, he's still a pretty damn good player, even if he is sort of past his prime. But still, it's a veteran presence if the Eagles were to bring him in. But I don't know. There are some other names: Levante David, Deion Jones. Again, more veterans. They might go that route now that I think about it. It's just they probably would come a little cheaper than TJ Edwards, who's younger than at least Levante David and Bobby Wagner. But it's certainly a position that will need to be filled if TJ Edwards isn't back. So those three positions, certainly running back has to be addressed as well.
I just real quick on the defense, I just think it's interesting kind of how much money the Eagles are going to what positions are they going to prioritize first? It's like, because I'm kind of with you that I do think kind of the way that you phrased it where hey, TJ Edwards has been the signal caller on this defense, the presence in the middle of the field obviously has been getting better season after season. If they want him back, are they kind of more willing to be hey, we're not going to spend as heavy on safety, and really just go into it with trying to re-sign C.J. Gardner-Johnson and
Right.
go with Reed Blankenship at the other safety position. So,
Mhm.
I think that's interesting of what they determine is like kind of the priority on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, it's man, there's gonna be a lot of moving parts in the next few weeks, and yeah, it's gonna make me a little nervous, but we'll see. But yeah, going back to running back, that's on the offensive side of the ball, definitely the biggest priority. Like I said, Miles Sanders, I don't expect to come back. Um, and I mean, there are a few names. I mean, like I said in the draft, Bijan Robinson. Unlikely, but it's still a possibility. I believe Kareem Hunt is a free agent.
He is.
That would be intriguing. And the Eagles were linked to him before the trade deadline this season. So that's certainly an interesting name out there. And I mean, with this offensive line, maybe he could be pretty good downhill runner. I think it complements Kenneth Gainwell and maybe Boston Scott comes back, but I think it would be a pretty solid fit if the Eagles were to go after him. But so I would say on the offensive side, that's the biggest priority. And I mean, you could say wide receiver 3, maybe look in the draft for that. Maybe a veteran wide receiver. Quez Watkins might get traded. He's didn't really have a great season last year. I mean, he had that drop in the Super Bowl too, which was costly. Yeah, I mean,
I'm curious at the running back position, like just thinking it through, like because I feel like it's a little bit of a risk for the Eagles to say, all right, like we're gonna go in with Kenny Gainwell, and like yes, if they go ahead and draft a running back in the first round, then all right, like the expectations for that first round pick to really be productive. But if they were to, I wonder if another route that they could go would be to try and look after a guy who's maybe like been a little bit of a backup or a shared snaps throughout his career, and then also try and complement it with a guy like Kenny Gainwell and maybe a mid-round pick at the running back position. And two guys that come to mind for me would be guys like Alexander Madison, who's been a backup for a lot of his career behind Dalvin Cook. Could he get more snaps? A guy like Damian Harris from New England, who had to share snaps throughout his career. Guys who haven't been the full workhorse. Giving them a little bit of a bigger opportunity, giving Kenny Gainwell a little bit of a bigger opportunity, and then also, taking a swing on a mid-round pick at the running back position, which, as we know, can pan out and can certainly contribute early on.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. I mean, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, yeah, there's not really going to be a lead back if it's, Damian Williams or some of the other names you brought up. But
it would certainly be running back by committee if that were the route they were going to
go. Yeah, which I'd be fine with. There doesn't have to be a lead back, especially in today's NFL where, I mean, you see the Chiefs as the prime example of that. Pacheco, McKinnon, Jerick McKinnon, all these guys that they rotate in, but they're all effective in their own way. So there doesn't have to be a specific, you don't have to have a 3-down back.
I'm also just curious how much Howie Roseman and the coaching staff prioritize a running back because of how run dominant they were, especially because of the fact that Jalen Hurts has such a running dynamic to his game and kind of the run option plays that he would run with Miles Sanders. So I wonder if bringing in another running back or drafting a running back early, even if they maybe trade back a little bit from where they are in the first round right now, I wonder if that's something they consider as well. So I am curious how they're going to go about addressing the running back position.
Yeah, it's going to be, oh man, it's going to be quite something to watch to see how they play it out. I really don't expect them to draft a running back in the first round, but we'll get into draft stuff in another episode.
Yeah, that'll be down the road for sure. One other thing I'm curious to see in free agency, now that we've brought it up, is who ends up getting more money, Cam Sutton or James Bradbury. That's something I'm curious about because I think both of them are going to get paid, and I truly do think Cam Sutton's going to be back in a Steeler uniform next season. But I'm curious if the money that he gets from the Steelers to re-sign is more than James Bradbury gets elsewhere, or potentially with the Eagles again.
I mean, I don't know, man. I mean, James Bradbury, when you have a season like he did, the numbers don't lie. Even if
the numbers don't lie, but Cam Sutton holds up very well in the advanced metrics still.
He
He
does.
holds up
Yeah.
very well in
And
the advanced metrics, and he's a little bit more versatile. So I will say that for him. And he's
I'm
younger.
yeah, I was gonna say he's also younger. So I mean, maybe he does have more value than James Bradbury. That would be. I mean, I wouldn't. I don't know. Would I be surprised if Ken Sutton got paid more? Maybe not. Now that you mention it, no, maybe not.
I think that they're both going to they're both going to get paid. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, that's so
Which one?
fascinating.
Just something because it's hard to ask who you think is truly going to get paid more because there's so many intangibles that go into it. But yeah, dude, it's going to be interesting, no doubt. So I don't know anything else you have on the free agency. I want to talk a little bit about some of these cap casualties. I kind of expect their potential extensions that we expect to come this offseason. So
Yeah, that's all I've got. So
all right, sounds good. So with the Steelers, really, I mean, I think the one guy that's I think is really going to be the name that's going to get bounced around all offseason about getting a potential extension is going to be Alex Highsmith because he had the career
yep.
year, 37 tackles, 15 sacks, 5 forced fumbles. I mean, again, I keep on referencing what Omar Khan said at the combine, but I mean, he did give the Steelers fans a lot of nuggets in the stuff that he said, and one of it was the fact that I think he told reporters directly, he's like, "You guys know how we handle young players that we see ascending," and he was like, "We'll," and I think that was exactly the quote. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Steelers try to get something done with him before before the season starts, but it also wouldn't surprise me if they he's not going to get the same level of priority that TJ Watt and Minkah Fitzpatrick have gotten the last 2 seasons. And even
Yeah.
Cam Hayward for that matter to get extensions. So,
Mhm.
yeah, like did the Steelers want to re-sign him? Yes, but they're not going to go out of their way to make it happen or give him more money than really what he's worth. So he's the one
Right.
guy that I could see getting an extension this offseason
Mhm.
for the Steelers.
Man, I really try to look and see who would be in contention for an extension. I mean, with all the free agents, it's not that doesn't really count as an extension necessarily. That's more just re-signing. But the only player really I could think of was Devontae Smith. Even then, it's too early, and he still has
Yeah.
his fifth-year option. I mean, Jalen Hurts is obviously going to get one. That's
Yeah.
the
I mean, and
biggest
that's
one.
really all it comes down to
That's
for the
yeah,
Eagles.
that's literally it.
Is
I mean,
and dude, I mean, well, we got the news today of Daniel Jones getting 40 million a season from the New York Giants. I mean, what's Jalen Hurts gonna get?
it's gonna be more. It's significantly more than that. Like I said, I think it has to be at least 45.
I was
It's
gonna say it's got
probably
to be at least 45. There's
like
no
it's
way it's
gonna.
not at least 45.
I
I
think
mean,
it's gonna be closer to 50. If it, I wouldn't be surprised if it eclipsed that number. Um, yeah, that's. I mean, he just the season he had, the Super Bowl performance he had. I mean, yeah, he's gonna get paid. It's better to do it now rather than later, and not have a Lamar Jackson type of situation where he gets some sort of like non-exclusive
I mean,
franchise thing.
bro,
That's
I'm just
all.
looking at it. I don't mean to cut you off, but I mean, Kyler Murray, his average annual value is 46 million a season. Like Jalen
Yeah,
Hurts is
that's the
getting
guy.
more
Yeah,
than that.
yeah, and he's way better.
He
And
is. He is way better. He is way better. And I mean, I mean, that's Kyler Murray's only third on the list. Second is Russell Wilson at 48 and a half, and then Aaron Rodgers is making over 50 million a year. So
Yeah. So
he's gonna he's
might
gonna get
restart the
paid, and it's gonna
market.
hurt the Eagles. It's gonna hurt the Eagles cap situation. But
Is
I
he
mean,
yeah.
you got to do it. You got to do it because if you wait, it's only going to be more down the line.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking of other quarterbacks who are eligible for extension. I think Joe Burrow might be.
He might be, yeah. Well, no, because they would have had to exercise the 5th-year
Oh
option on
yeah,
him,
the
so
fifth
not
year.
yet.
So they have another year, but still,
Yeah.
yeah, it's he's the only one really on the Eagles who's going to get an extension.
Yes,
No one else.
He will be closer. He will be closer to 50 than he is to 40. That's without even a question.
Yeah, for sure. So that's all I have on the Eagles.
Now, I wonder he's a guy. I wonder if he kind of because he's got such a strong leadership presence, and you know that he is like locked in on winning. I wonder if he kind of does a little bit of the Patrick Mahomes route and says, "Hey, I'm gonna like take a little bit less and really kind of devote it to continue to build the team around me," because that's kind of what Patrick Mahomes did in his contract. He
Yeah,
took more years. His average annual salary is lower, and I mean, look at the offensive line that the Eagles have been able to put in front of him year after year. I mean, you lose Tyreek Hill, but you're still able to bring in wide receivers for him. You re-sign Chris Jones. So I wonder if that's something that's maybe on the table for Jalen Hurts.
Listen, he's a team player. I wouldn't be surprised if his number was closer to 40 in that sense, because the dude loves to. He just his work ethic again loves to win. He's a winner. I mean, just everything. The intangibles are there. Everything. It's just like he would. He sure. I know he wants to be back in that Super Bowl. I'd like. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, either way, I wouldn't be surprised. But I mean, he's gonna get paid one way or the other. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, no, he absolutely is. So let's move on to, you have any cap casualties potentially on the Eagles? Again, we're looking kind of far ahead at this point, but I think it's fair to assess that there could be some guys that go just to save some money a little bit as free agency hits.
Well, I don't know about cap casualties necessarily. More restructuring deals. That's what Howie Roseman does a lot of, especially with I believe the Eagles only having $8 million in cap space to work. I think less than that. Darius Slay and Lane Johnson have the biggest numbers. Slay at 26 million, Lane Johnson 24. I mean, Howie Roseman tends to restructure those in some way or form. Spread that number out, especially to free up cap space. And you need to sign your draft picks too. They need money too. Like, you need something to work with. So those two, I wouldn't be surprised if their deals were restructured, like I said, for lack of a better term.
For the Steelers, I mean, I already talked about Mitchell Trubisky. I mean, I think it's a smart move, but I don't know if they necessarily do that. The one thing, and I'll echo this again, Omar Khan is a financial expert. I mean, we have yet to see if he can, scout young college talent, how he allocates money in free agency. But he's got Andy Weidel there, who's, obviously set the draft board for the Eagles for a number of years under Howie Roseman. So for Khan to be there, I have faith that he's going to make the salary cap work any way that he needs to. But the two other guys I have my eye on as potential cap casualties, one is Ahkello Witherspoon, just because, I mean, if the Steelers re-sign Cam Sutton, they still have Levi Wallace there. I think they're going to bring in a cornerback in the draft this season. I don't think it makes a ton of sense to keep him around, and they could save $4 million in cap space. The other guy, and it hurts because I really liked what he did last year, and I think he's a great player for this organization, would be Myles Jack. I mean, if the Steelers cut him, they save $8 million in cap space, and there's only 1 year left on his deal. I would love to have him back in Pittsburgh for another year. I don't know if there's a way that Khan can restructure Myles Jack's contract. I would love for him to be around again. I would feel so much better about this linebacker room if he's still around and they're able to keep him. But it's just a number, especially when you hear Omar Khan say that they're not looking to cut Mitch Trubisky. It's hard to imagine any world where he doesn't become a cap casualty. So, I don't know if maybe the Steelers would be willing to cut him and consider bringing him back. But, I mean, that's just not how the Steelers operate. So I really think it either comes down to Khan can find a way to make it work with his contract still on the books, or, the Steelers are just going to be that much thinner at inside linebacker, because $8 million with where the Steelers are currently at. I mean, currently, according to Spotrac, they're over the salary cap. So they've got to find some money somewhere, and I have faith in Omar Khan to do it. But, those are the guys that could potentially be on their way out just because of their contract situation. So that being said, we'll close things out with just talking about the Eagles filling some of these coaching staff positions. So obviously filling offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator positions were the two big ones. So what'd you make of the move? Obviously the promotion, I forget his name at offensive coordinator, and then they brought in the former Bears defensive coordinator at for the Eagles defensive coordinator spot. So what'd you think of the moves? Sorry, the names are slipping my mind right now.
Oh no, yeah, Brian Johnson, the quarterback coach, former quarterbacks coach, promoted. That was expected.
Nothing shocking there.
Yeah, that's. I don't really. I mean, I like the move. I think it makes sense. Then the Sean Desai hired as a defensive coordinator. I don't mind it. I think it was probably the best option out there. Especially after Vance Joseph was hired by the Broncos. And he has worked with Vic Fangio. I mean, one of the best defensive minds in football. And like you said, former defensive coordinator. So he's still, like, the one knock on Desai is that he only has 1 year of experience, calling defenses. So But according to I can't remember who it was, but I read on Bleeding Green Nation, the best is yet to come for him because he's still he's still inexperienced, but inexperienced in terms of play calling. He has lots of experience in the NFL, 2013 to 2021 with the Bears. So it's not like he's been getting hired out of college and is is just it's a totally different thing. Like he's been in the league for a while.
He's been in the league for a while, but he's still a young mind. And I mean, you also throw in the fact too. I mean, I think he spent a year with the Seahawks as well. Talk about great defensive minds in the NFL. I mean, Pete Carroll's another one. So
and Pete Carroll also leaked that the hiring, which was funny. But the one unfortunate thing with that is defensive back coach was also in the running for a promotion, but he's now with the Ravens. Just got hired today. That was hard for me. I mean, the Darius Slay, I believe, was raving and really wanted the Eagles to hire him as the defensive coordinator, but I mean, he did such a good job with that secondary. It's just a shame to see him go. It sucks, but that's just what happens when you bring in a new defensive coordinator. Different coaches come in. And the weird thing is, Matt Patricia is now linked with the Eagles as a linebacker coach. Don't really want to see that.
I mean, his time. I mean, if he can't make it work, I mean, granted, for whatever reason, the Patriots were having him at kind of on the offensive side of the ball last year. But I mean, like, if he can't resurrect his career, with Bill Belichick where he had his glory days, I mean, I don't know if it's really worth it to bring him in, and especially a guy that's had head coaching experience before. You don't want to cause any rifts. If it's with a obviously a younger head coach like Nick Sirianni. So I'm kind of with you. They don't need to do that.
Yeah, please don't. But overall, I think those are pretty good. I'm content. I'm happy with it. Obviously there are some question marks, but overall, I think it was a good hire. So
yeah, I like it as well. And I'm very curious, and I alluded to this I think 2 episodes ago. Or maybe it was last episode. I'm very curious to see what the Eagles defense looks like and how the Cardinals do with Jonathan Gannon now obviously not there. Because I feel like, I don't know, I've alluded to this before, but maybe he got a little bit too much credit when really more of it deserved to be with the players, so to speak. And I'm curious with his passive, his passive system now off in Arizona. I'm curious how the Eagles defense performs this year. And obviously, a lot of that's going to be what free agents they retain and what free agents they bring in. So, any final thoughts here as we wrap things up?
No, that's all I got, man. That was a good episode. That was great.
Sounds good, man. And I mean, like I said at the top, we will be back doing these free agency episodes. Well, I mean, this was our big free agency preview episode, but our next episode, we'll hopefully have some free agency news to talk about as things get going here and the NFL offseason gets well underway. The NFL doesn't stop, neither will we. So we will see you next time. Peace out, everybody.